All right, here we go.
Okay. So I know everybody's favorite topic is back, monetary policy. Unfortunately, there are not as many music videos about the euro. Imagine that. But I've tried to supplement with a lot of political cartoons because they seemed to be popular last time. So we're going to talk about the euro and figure out if it's currency worth saving. So my research question is, can the euro evolve to serve the EU's diverse needs in politics, and is it worth doing so to make the euro evolve? And my position is yes, it can evolve, and yes, it's worth making it evolve, but it's going to take a uniting common cause or a pretty severe trauma to convince people that doing so is worth it. So just a brief rundown of what we're going to go through. So as you can see, the euro is a ticking time bomb as it sits. We're going to cover some of the reasons that drastic change is needed by talking about the euro's failed promises. We're going to cover just two, don't worry, crucial economics terms. And finally, we're going to talk about my scholars and the different ways that they interpret the euro. So here, let's talk about the euro's failure. So again, an inflection point for the euro's success or failure has been the Greek crisis and the larger financial crisis that it's related to as a whole. So as you can see in this political cartoon, we have the EU concerned about Greece leaving, and Greece kind of not really thinking ahead of itself, perhaps as much as it should. So one important thing to note with my debate is that there is a lot of consensus among the scholars, and a lot of it has to do with kind of addressing these failures and kind of like where we are now. Historians and economists alike who I reviewed pretty much unanimously agree that the euro can't succeed in its current state. The main way they disagree is what's the best path forward. And then the one exception to that is the two of the scholars believe differently about the four freedoms of the European Union. So those are the freedom of goods, people, freedom of movement for goods, people, services, and capital, which kind of like define the primary benefits of what the EU has created. So while on the one hand, those who believe that the euro can stay, believe that the euro is crucial for those four freedoms to exist, one of them who doesn't believe in the euro's future thinks that you can separate those things. So the Greek crisis has shown that the European Central Bank's policies are insufficient to regulate diverse economies. So basically, because during the Greek crisis, Germany, which is kind of the leader with the European Central Bank, was doing fine. They kind of refused to enact monetary policies that would have helped Greece recover. And there's no great policy within the European Central Bank's toolkit to kind of solve a problem like that, where many countries are doing well and others are not doing as well. And then third, German political movements reveal the euro's enduring challenges. So the deeper integration that I believe the success of the euro is dependent on clashes with a lot of conservative politics, which have been revealed as a rising force in recent days, and their banking policies, which are also very conservative, as the Greek crisis showed. So we have two competing economic theories at work here that kind of reveal where the EU is right now in the ECB's policies versus where I believe they should be to succeed. So currently, the European Central Bank it's mostly just a carryover of former German banks, which is why we have Angela Merkel here with her whip. That was so this is kind of like the classical economics thing, right? When we're in a crisis, we should tax people more and spend less, and that way we'll have more money. It's pretty common sense. It's aimed at preventing inflation, which is the primary goal of the ECB favored by Germans. The problem with it is that businesses have to adapt on their own. And in places like Greece, there's just not enough capital, not enough skilled labor for that to happen quickly and adaptively. So, the kind of, not really opposite, but opposing in this case, since the structural reforms, which most closely relate to Keynesian economics, so if you kind of think like the New Deal in America and FDR, rather than spending less, the government spends more in a downturn, helps industries turn themselves around, adapt to new business models so that they can hire more people and revive the economy naturally and with a kind of more long-term focus. It's favored by many economists. All the economists that I read for this in favor of it. So now on to the pro-Euro side. So we're going to go through three. I kind of copied my friend's structure. I like this visual layout. So we're going to talk about three people on each side, more or less. So Enderlein believed that the compromise that created the Euro's existence means that the Euro doesn't really serve any countries within the European Union well, because it kind of strikes a middle line between the countries doing well and the countries doing poorly. And that policy, so like let's say if Germany needs a 0% inflation rate and Greece needs a 4% inflation rate, when you put a 2% inflation rate, it hurts both of them. And so right now, the situation is not great. And then he has a fourfold integration plan that kind of, some of the points are not super interesting or worth going into here, but as I talked about before, he believes that the four freedoms of the EU depend on a common currency to succeed. So he believes there can't be, true freedom of movement for capital if there are different currencies. And then, so these are kind of like the two most important parts of his fourfold integration plan. So first, EU member nations must forfeit sovereignty when insolvent. So basically, countries like Greece, if they're in debt, they're unable to pay their bills. They're going to have to give up some control of their national policies so that the European Central Bank can step in and bring them back up to speed. And then also the European Central Bank needs policies where it can compensate for this disparity. So the fact that all of its nations may not be doing, the same thing as far as economics at the same time. Ames and Rezai, so these are economists who focus on the monetary union kind of as a way to fight nationalism, which I thought was an interesting point because a lot of people, it's easy to see this as a thing where the EU stepping in more is kind of going to like enrage nationalists and stuff like that. But they say it's kind of going to ameliorate, by keeping the euro, it's going to ameliorate these concerns of nationalists because the protectionist policies that they usually seek to integrate, like tariffs and whatnot, really hurt more than help them, at least in the long term. So by remaining united under one currency, all the nations have better chance of the economic success, regardless of their current position. And then third, so we have Ralph Findel and David Marr, who believe that political union, so basically deeper integration, uniting not just currencies, but like more political forces, kind of giving those up to the higher body of the EU, are a prerequisite for the euro to succeed in the long run. So they studied Latin America's former monetary union that failed in the 1800s, and their conclusion was that the only successful monetary unions also have political union with clearly defined roles for kind of like bigger, stronger nations and smaller, weaker nations like Germany and France versus Greece and Italy. Okay, so on the other side, we've got first Andreas Nolte, who says that more integration is inherently less democratic. So his gripes begin before any talk of more further integration even begins. So he believes that because of the European Commission and kind of the way that the European Union came to be and is governed is very anti-democratic because of the European Commission and the judiciary are not directly elected or anything like that. That giving the European Central Bank more authority in a similar way would inherently mean taking it from the people, and doing so would be just kind of adding wood to the fire as far as nationalism and other problematic aspects of current society. So here we've got a little cartoon showing our debate between voting against Europe or against democracy in general. A rock and a hard place situation for me. So here, Dorothy Heisenberg, another economist. So she took a more like retrospective approach to the euro, and so she, a lot of times, in fact, in Interling's article, a lot of his assumptions are based on the fact that Germany, in many aspects, was always very interested in starting the euro, and that it thought it had a lot to gain. But she dispels that with a lot of empirical evidence that shows that, at least as far as political interest groups and corporations were concerned, that was not the case at all. The majority of people did not think the euro had anything to offer them. They were fine with the current system. It was in a time of economic prosperity, at least in Germany. And so she believes that when those people were disappointed during economic downturns in the early 2000s, we couldn't really blame them for that because they kind of saw it coming, essentially. And so this is just kind of important to think about because it's easy to discount the German political movements as just nationalist movements that don't want some big power controlling their country, but there are also legitimate concerns as far as economics go, that the monetary union hasn't always served these people well. It hasn't always been a force for good for their businesses. And then finally, Bernardo de Quiros believes that the euro wasn't really necessary at all to begin with, and that it really hasn't proven any of the promises that it's made that are exclusive to monetary union. So he believes that the only real successes of the European Central Bank would be equally possible through parallel currencies, and that's namely stability is what he's looking at. And he believes that the rising nationalism that's kind of incurred by the EU's control is threatening that stability. So in a way, he believes the euro has made it less stable rather than more stable. So finally, just to wrap up, I believe that the euro can and must evolve to serve the EU's diverse needs in politics, but it can't do so without a uniting common cause for severe trauma first because of the massive political weight against it.
Thank you.